To the top, we have the Samsung S95B. To the bottom, we have the LG G3. And I'm here to tell you that if we are just taking these TVs out of the box, comparing it to something that has been fully optimized, like at the top, it's going to lose. The LG G3 will lose miserably without a chance of ever fighting back. Now, I say this because this is not a stock comparison. I am not just taking these TVs out of the box. Both TVs have been fully calibrated and highly optimized on a level that is not normal. And I have to specify that because other YouTubers are not doing this. They're comparing default retail level TVs, right? Just in retail mode, torch mode, basic default modes, and saying what is the king and what is not, okay? And the ones that aren't are doing reference accurate calibrations, which look like this. Very bland, very washed. You can try things like the ISF dark mode. This is pretty much what the reference look is as well. It's very dark, very washed. It does not favor color. It is very ugly and very washed. I mention this every video because it is important to understand that when I'm displaying certain qualities that a TV has, you're not going to see it. I also did see a couple of people say things like, hey, you know, my LG G3, for example, looked really bad. And I didn't like the picture and ended up returning it. I did see a couple people saying that. If that is you, yes, out of the box, this probably has one of the pukiest and ugliest picture qualities I think I've seen in a while out of a high-end set. LG tends to favor Cold 20, which is very cool and very not great. They do that on every set. They don't really try a whole lot. They don't really put their best foot forward. So you can't expect a whole lot from them in that area. Now, I'm going to show you, back to this reference image here, what it looks like when you actually try for the LG G3 and fully optimize it. And there he is, back from the morgue. Look at him shine. The LG G3 now holding his punches and dishing them too. This is what your TV is fully capable of. No longer looking like something dead out of the turn of the century. It's actually looking like something that is futuristic and something that is wonderful. I mean, it is a breath of fresh air. And this is something that I want to illustrate to you guys because, again, this is not a normal level of calibration and adjustment. This is something that takes endless hours of time, and most people, by most, I mean pretty much all of them, aren't doing this. Especially when you hire a calibrator to come to your house for $500, they're just going to do a reference accurate calibration to Kalman and call it a day. They are not going to try to figure out how the algorithmic processing works. They are not going to try to sit there and figure out anything outside of the bare minimum of what the job requires. Most employees these days are like that. So I did want to mention that because this is reality and I wanted to talk about it. So now that you kind of have that out of the way, if you guys want the settings, make sure you join. The link's going to be down below. But we're going to get started by talking about the winner. The winner is going to be the Samsung S95B overall. However, the G3 does hold his punches very well. Now, that doesn't mean that the LG G3 doesn't punch incredibly hard. So if we look at this example where contrast is quite clearly on the screen, and one of the best examples I think you'd ever see for contrast, right? You have, again, white with black on it and black with white on it. In terms of what we're seeing here, representation-wise, you are able to see a lot. And what it shows us is that the LG G3 maintains a higher level of peak brightness than the Samsung S95B, where you see it dimming down. Albeit there are ways to kind of cheat and trick the Samsung to get brighter. You throw away a lot of detail and start clipping massively when that happens. So you do have to go dimmer in order to accomplish something similar in this particular example. Now, when you get to examples like this, it will become abundantly clear and very obvious that what's happening on the LG G3 is just different than what's happening on the Sony S95B at the top. So the LG G3 is doing a wonderful job of showing you that detail in terms of highlight placement. As we can clearly see, this is way brighter than this. This is just dimmer in the background by comparison. It always will be. That's just how it is, right? Now, some people might take a grand protest of that and say the Samsung S95B isn't dim or whatever the case may be, which it's not. But in certain examples, LG has a way of over brightening and getting really, really bright, like torch level of brightness. It's actually pretty impressive. So their brightness booster is definitely working very well, and I mean very well this year on the G3, but it doesn't always hold through to a true benefit. In the next example here, the skin tones on the S95B are illuminated perfectly. I don't know what YouTube's going to show you, but it's basically flawless. Highlights are catching where they're supposed to. Now, every time I say highlights, I mean just that, like the highlight placement of a light source, which means we can see things like the lights here catching here. We can see the highlight around her forehead here, from the spotlighting in the studio, you can see all of that, where here it's not as intelligent and you are running into more of a flatter way of lighting. Now, the whole concept and purpose of lighting is to create dimension. So when they go into the studio and master all these lighting techniques, they're doing so that you can get immersion or depth out of the subject or the model in this case, where that becomes realism. You're not getting that level of realism on the LG G3, and that is unfortunate. Another thing you are not getting on the LG G3 is details, at least to the degree that you are on the S95B. I can see every little dent and wrinkle in her cheek here, curving and curling and wrapping around, and all the little ways that the shadows catch with the highlights, creating that immersion, creating that depth where we just don't have that. The LG G3 is just more flat by comparison. Again, giving a more plasticky look to faces due to the highlights. Now, of course, there is a way that you can dim down the highlights and kind of and exaggerate and enhance the effect a little bit, but it really doesn't look that great. And a lot of people are going to be very uncomfortable with how dim the image does get when you start doing that. When you start calibrating televisions, you have a couple different methods of how you can do it. Now, this is important for the comparison process, so just bear with me. Okay, so when you're in color space, the first thing about the Samsung that really sucks, it's locked. The color gamut is locked to 709. You can't do a thing past that if you want to use a custom color space. Never ever should this be how it works. It should always be you are free to select and manipulate color spaces however you want. A perfect example, again, being the LG OLED, where I'm in BT 2020 right now, and I am free to manipulate this on SDR content however I see fit to change it and get it properly adjusted. Where here, Samsung doesn't even give you the choice. They're just like, screw you, stay in Rec 709 if you want to use advanced color correction. So stupid and limiting, because their TVs could quite literally be like monster tier unbeatable TVs with this one fix, this one change alone that they refuse to implement. Year after year I talk about it, not enough people are, and I'm telling you, this is what's holding them back from being the best TVs on planet Earth right now. So unfortunately, you have to select BT709. It's grayed out, the function isn't available, and there's nothing you can do about it. And even when you do start making adjustments, you can only adjust red, green, and blue. What the hell is that? Well, then you have to basically balance the red, blue, and green channels in order to get a look that, honestly speaking, won't give you anything extra or better in any way, shape, and or form. So the immediate answer is to then go into your color space and select native, because as you can clearly see, from custom to native, you get more color anyway. So why wouldn't you just select native and call it a day? That I don't know. And then the same can hold true for this as well. Like, you're noticing you still have the ability to adjust saturation independently from the tint, which applies a general hue, and then the luminance, which is the brightness, obviously, of those pixels. Like, this is some next level shit right here. And this is why you're able to get these TVs like the Sony A95L, LG's various OLEDs, pretty much all of them, okay, to another level that unfortunately you just don't have on the Samsung, because they are limiting themselves by not giving you a hue, saturation, and luminance way of adjusting your colors. Now, the reason I bring all this up is if you look at this example with Renji from, again, Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc, you can clearly see the difference in the cyan throw and pull because of the ability to adjust those colors independently. And again, you're noticing you have more of the ambient glow of that cyan on the character, on the environment. All that is missing on the Samsung. And this comes with Samsung year after year ignoring the fact that you need to be able to independently control your color space from your color gamut. And it just isn't happening. And it's so incredibly frustrating for me as a calibrator every single year. And I know it might not be something most people care about, but you should, because this directly impacts and affects the way that your picture is able to look as a bottom line kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean this is all rainbows and butterflies for LG, as we see in this example. The G3 at the bottom is going to struggle greatly with skin tones and anime when it gets to those really like ambient, like cyan type looks, because again, WOLED, for whatever reason, isn't doing a great job with these types of scenes. So you'll notice that the Samsung at the top has just way better skin tonality by miles, leaps, leagues, bounds. It's decimating the LG. And so that happens when you get to these particular low light scenes where there's smoke usually rolling across the screen. And again, we're in Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc, and you can see it for yourself here. We are, what are we, 8 minutes and 20 seconds into season 2, episode 21. So you can replicate this yourself and you can see what I'm talking about if you really want to or need to. But essentially, this is what it looks like. Not great. So while neither technology is perfect, like in this example, again, that cyan pull happening here on the ice, I really do prefer that way more than what Samsung ends up doing, where it's just like it's one flat color. You don't see all the variations. It really does bug me. Again, I feel like you really should have that, and you don't on the Samsung. So again, they both trade back and forth with things that I don't like. So then how does the Samsung win? Well, in examples like this pretty much tells you everything you need to know. The Samsung is just really damn 3D. It has a way of drawing you in and pulling you in ways that the LG G3 just doesn't. The LG G3, don't get me wrong, is a magnificent television and it's incredibly 3D in its own right. But going up against the Samsung S95B, it's just like suicide at this point because there are just levels of dramatic pop and flare that don't exist. And unfortunately, the color red is still a problem on this LG G3. So it's comparatively to QD-OLED, of course, you're not going to have the same level of shock and awe. I mean, in this example, we can see the rays of sun on her face on the Samsung S95B at the top way more prominently and realistically than what we do on, obviously, the LG G3 at the bottom. And in this example, it is an absolute decimation. While the LG G3 does look very beautiful, and reds now look a little bit more like what red is supposed to look like, we get to a contrast problem, where the tack sharp nature, the three-dimensional pull into the television, into the screen, into the world looks better on the Samsung S95B at the top, where on the G3, you're not really getting that, and colors, even post-calibration like green, just remain a little bit too cool. Now, this is obviously due to the fact that it's a WOLED, but still, it is limiting. And this is why I always say, like, yes, WOLED has made amazing advancements in ways like their brightness booster, which is spectacular. But ultimately, when you get to color accuracy, you're going to have some problems because of the limiting WRGB OLED panel, which is weird because in some examples, it'll be more accurate. Others, it won't be. And it really becomes like this ultimate game of like back and forth. And again, you can kind of notice it here too, where there's just a lot more blue on the screen in the hues around the face and things like that. I'm noticing it especially around here. I notice her face is really blue comparatively to that where that is not the case. Also, the shade of the dress way more detailed on the LG G3, or rather the Samsung S95B at the top. Now, in this example, red is not quite as bad as what we've seen before on older OLEDs. So this is where the new LG OLEDs do target a more realistic shade of red that will be more enjoyable for everybody. So again, right down to the type of shade of red that it is. Some reds look better, not all reds are as bad. So that's the one thing. When it comes to red being a problem color, it's not consistently a problem color, and that also gets really annoying because on the one hand it's fantastic, but then in some other ways it's like really dated. So when you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and if you don't, I can't really say much there. Now this image is pretty much terrible to showcase because it's not going to pick up obviously right at all. The image at the bottom is going to look overly red and just blown out and not great, and the image at the top ain't going to look great either. But essentially, if you can see the difference in the contrast around the flower, you know, the isolation around the hair, the eyelids, the detail where this looks more plasticky, then that's really the difference that I would say that you should pick up on. So even though they have a super resolution feature and, you know, an AI upscaling feature and all that stuff, it's nowhere near as nice as what we have on the Samsung. And then it gets to this point where we start seeing difference after difference. The G3 just looks more dead by comparison. So this is where Samsung kind of gets away with not having an advanced color management system. Now, don't get me wrong, they need one. They should have one. It would be wonderful because that would push it to truly what I believe to be an unbeatable territory for the Samsung line of televisions. I really feel like if they did this, they wouldn't have any competitors. Now, this might be someone saying that it's biased, but reviewing every major TV this year, I can pretty much tell you if Samsung does that one change to their line, whether it's a firmware update to everybody or it's something they implement on new models, it's game over because that is what they're missing. Everything else they're really nailing really well, and we can see it here. Skin tones look great, all that stuff. Even going up against the LG G3, which has wonderful highlight detail and stuff like that, LG just is missing that extra color in the skin, and that really is holding them back. Doesn't mean the colors are bad now. Don't hear this and think, oh, you're just bashing LG. No, no, no. LG is taking on the impossible. They are quite literally taking on the world's greatest consumer level television right now on the planet Earth, which is the Samsung S95B. I've said this on numerous occasions. I'll say it again. For your money, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, you really cannot buy a better TV. It does not exist outside of this one right here. I've tested it against everything, and it has beaten everything. And I'm telling you, this is where you kind of get to the point of diminishing returns when you talk about QD-OLEDs and stuff like that, but we're talking about WOLED. Now again, this is where I was talking about the ability to adjust color though, because again, if you remember what I was saying in, that earlier example of bleach, when you get to cyans, it just looks so much richer on LG and on TVs with an advanced color management system than what we have on, obviously, the Samsung at the top. I got a little prompt here, just gonna clear that out since it's talking about some voice recognition. I'm not trying to use any voice recognition feature, just randomly popped up. So I guess that's something to mention. It just like randomly spawned this crap and it's like, oh, see user agreement. Do I really have to? I don't really care. So I'll click see user agreement and then immediately back out because I don't give a fuck. So there you go. Now that one's out of my way. But, so that's annoying. You have those weird little smart prompts that pop up like that, which first time that ever happened and you get to see it in real time. So yeah, that's not as great either comparatively, where I don't really have that on the Samsung. But also, look at the color difference. Like that looks like absolute just trash. Like what even is that versus this, where this looks so much better, obviously. And again, it's going to trade back and forth, and it shouldn't, in my opinion. Like especially like sunset scenes like this, good luck finding the quantum.OLED. Which one's the QD-OLED, guys? Can you figure it out? Like if it was a blind test, you wouldn't be able to see shit. You'd be looking at it like, I don't know which one is which. And that's the point where it kind of like, if one was more expensive than the other, then it wouldn't make any sense. But seeing how the Samsung is cheaper than the WOLED, the WOLED just doesn't make sense at this point because, really, they're indistinguishable. And it's not even, like, indistinguishable in a way where it's like, oh, it's indistinguishable, so maybe I should just pay more. Like, no, it doesn't make sense like that. Now, don't get me wrong, the highlight detail is excellent. In this example, we can notice it right here, especially, like, it just looks really, really good. But the Samsung does provide a more colorful image at the top where it is richer, and that is the word that I will use, where you feel like you're tasting a fine wine. You're looking at more of a premium, luxurious picture that was painted with the highest colors and the highest paints, where at the bottom you can tell that you've kind of went to Walmart and you have the same level of skill, but you're just presenting it in a different way because you bought the cheap stuff. That's kind of what it feels like on the WOLED at the bottom. And it's a reoccurring theme here. Again, looking at the color red, it goes right back to what I said before. So reds are always going to be a domination factor for the Samsung S95B, but when we get to other colors like the color blue, that's where we'll have a shift here. But again, skin tones as well. This is why the Samsung wins, because when you look at this is just way more accurate than this. This is just, it's too washed. It's not as nice. Now, again, you guys saw what I showed you earlier. If I were to take this out of the box and do what you're seeing on other YouTube channels, this would be a blowout, and I'm going to show you. Filmmaker mode right here, the industry's best, straight out of the box, right? You pay $2,000 for a TV, you think you're done? Absolutely not. This is what you're going to get, and it's going to look like absolute garbage. And you're seeing it right here in real time. It would quite literally be a blowout. On no planet does the Samsung get beaten by the LG G3 if you are optimizing your Samsung using beyond the reference calibration. So when I say you really can't just pull these TVs out of the box and say, hey, everybody, this is the best, you really can't. And you'll see some people, they'll try it and they'll try to talk their smack and they'll try to say like the way that I adjust TVs doesn't work and blah, blah, blah. We've seen a lot of trolls in the comments. You're going to keep seeing them. But I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be blown away by the transformation of just this image alone, okay? So this is what it would look like if you do filmmaker mode and you trust the industry standards and all that nonsense and so on and so forth. But I'm going to show you what it looks like when you go a step beyond that and you do it the way I tell you to do it. And just like that, you have an unrecognizable difference to the point where you can't even deny what you're seeing on the screen. Every color separated, every color isolated flawlessly. Just look at that isolation, so beautiful. This is what we have on the LG G3 after proper adjustment. So again, it's not that every example is going to be like a loss for LG or a loss for Samsung, so on and so forth. But I mean, look at the top of the Samsung, it's getting his ass beaten, where before it was dominating the LG in a massive way. So this is the importance of settings. And again, if you want my settings, they're $5. I promise you it'll transform your TV and you won't even notice a difference from the factory settings. You're going to be like, how the hell did I ever watch this thing before these settings? Trust me, it happens all the time. And the point of putting that out there is because I know that there are greedy calibrators that will try to overcharge you. So yeah, just skip being overcharged. Why suffer if you don't have to, kind of thing, and just throw the $5. Help the channel continue to grow, keep doing independent reviews like this, and you get the best settings for your TV. It's a win-win for all of us. And that's what I do here. I mean, look at this. We're going up against a Quantum.OLED, QD-OLED, and I have to say this is where it is impressive that LG was able to compete. Now, to be fair, I don't know if there's like maybe, licensing agreement issue or where they're just like not really ready to make that deal yet. But LG by themselves are already competing pretty identically on some scenes with colors with a QD-OLED. If they could somehow get their colors more pure, like red, for example, if they can get the purity of red to just increase to where it's not so warm and they cool off the red without cooling off the entire picture, and then, keeping it rich, they'll be right there. They'll be so close to beating everything else that it's kind of not even funny. Because red is really the one color that when you go back and compare these things, you're like, ugh, the reds are weak. The reds are very weak, and it continues to be a problem year after year. And I've said that I've been saying it since LG's been coming out with OLEDs. They need to fix the reds, and maybe one day they will, but that hasn't happened yet. To be fair, the C1 was the first step in the right direction, but past that, they really haven't gotten there. So you're able to see what this looks like, and you're able to see a little bit more in the way of like separation, isolation, things like that. Again, just the contrast at the top, the way that it's separating everything is just wonderful, where that's just a little too cool, and you lack a lot more in the way of contrast and the three-dimensional draw that we would get on, something like the S95B at the top. Now, I want to illustrate just how effective the brightness is on the LG G3. Okay, so right now we're at 50 brightness on the Samsung S95B, and then if we go down to the contrast, we're at 43, but we can raise it to 100 if we want, which is basically 50. It's not going to make a lick of difference, and you're going to see that here. So as you can clearly see, it doesn't get brighter than the brightest highlight, which happens and occurs right here. And again, it's still dimming down because algorithmically, it's preserving that face right there, and it's not doing what LG is doing where clipping is happening. You don't have as much shadow here. It's not as dark around the brows, giving you the contrast in the 3-dimension or the depth that you're getting off of the Samsung S95B. And this is the difference between the AI depth enhancer on the LG Alpha 9 Gen 6 or whatever we're on right now versus the Samsung at the top with the real depth enhancer technology. So in a nutshell, these TVs are incredibly similar. I mean, like, if you look at the image at the top and the image at the bottom, they do look pretty identical in person. I don't know what it's going to look like on YouTube, so I have to say in person. But, like, I can barely tell a difference between these two TVs right now. Like, it's almost impossible. Like, it's really hard. I mean, seriously difficult when we get to images like this. And that's where you kind of want to call it at a tie, which at one point during this comparison I did, until we start getting to more comparisons and we start really asking ourselves what these colors are supposed to look like, what would they look like, and that's when we arrive at different answers. For example, as I look at the ocean here, if I'm looking at something like a little island like this in the middle of the ocean, there's going to be variations of darkness because of the land formations beneath the surface of the water. And you're able to see that darkness form in the more depthful areas, the areas of more depth versus the more shallow areas that are lighter. You're able to see those transitions so clearly on the Samsung because of the level of contrast. Where here, not as much. You can just kind of make it out. It's a darker area, but it's not. You don't see that there's actual land formations like you're supposed to be seeing. And that's massive. That is a massive loss of information. And that is something that shouldn't be happening, but it does on the LG G3. And when it costs more, I can't sign off on information loss because that makes no sense. Why am I paying you more money to lose the detail and the information that I'm supposedly paying to gain? And then again, if we look at this shore right now, this is decimating anything that the WOLED is doing where that ain't it, right? And we have many examples that we can keep going through and keep cycling through, right? But ultimately, it's hard because, like, again, in an example like this, they do look very similar. The contrast though becomes more apparent on the Samsung though, and that helps it. It really does. Of course, with the popping nature of the colors and things like that. But the G3 can pass for a QD OLED though. I don't want you to hear this and think, oh, the G3 is just a washout, just another typical WOLED. This is one of the better WOLEDs out there, but it is still a WOLED, so it is limited in some areas. Again, not all areas, as we're seeing with the Ocean here, as we're seeing better color, right? Separated, right? So WOLED still has a benefit, right? You're seeing it here, way more accurate than what we're getting up here. That is very inaccurate. That is not great, not at all. And so it does trade back and forth, but ultimately, in too many areas, I'm noticing the LG is not able to keep up with the Samsung in terms of contrast, color placement, and those things do add up over time. And it gets to a point where you're like, all right, I've got to call it for the Samsung, but I'm going to say it edged it out, but only because of the nature of a WOLED panel and quantum dot being what they are, right? I think if LG ever does go QD OLED though, for something like the G4, it's game over for everybody. It really is, because they really do have everything down except how to appropriately place their color. But that being said, I want to see what you guys have to say about this whole thing, so let me know about it in the comments down below. And as always, I want to thank you guys for watching, the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.